Well, thank you all for joining me for part 3 of a 3-part series. And so what I thought I'd do is, it's totally understandable whether you haven't physically been in attendance for either one of the two, or maybe you actually have been here and you've chosen to just not think about it. Both are perfectly excusable reasons to forget what I've talked about. But I thought I'd start with a very brief recap of kind of the summary points of first presentation. And then I'll do the same thing on week 2's presentation, and then we're going to change it up for what I predominantly do for week 3, and this was based on your feedback. So if you remember last week I had you fill out note cards on just, what else would you like to hear about? Not that I know a lot about it, but as I previously stated, I do study gender, and I did my dissertation on it. That's probably my most common area of doing research and giving presentations, and I just did a whole 16-week course in the spring for the first time, so I'm kind of at least refreshed my mind on some of the latest research. So I took your suggestions, and they were all over the place, but I at least put them into 2 categories, and we're going to get your involvement. We're going to change up the format today, so I apologize for you online listeners. The format might be less appealing to you, but we're all about the in-crowd folks. And so we're going to do a little format today, and then I'll end with just some latest tidbits on the 2 categories of topics you all gave me that you appeared to want to know more about when it comes to gender. So let me start off with that recap from week 1. I'm gonna fly through these. There's literally just bullet points of the summary, so if it strikes you as a little shocking or maybe a little simplistic, probably a longer conversation explanation is needed, which I'm happy to do that after this presentation if one of these strikes you as what? Because I just tried to whittle it down. So we understood from the first week's presentation that baby boys and baby girls' brains start off reasonably quite similar, but then if you look at adult brains, they're actually quite different, and a lot of this is via neuroplasticity, which is to say how our environment interacts with our biology to adjust our brains, because ultimately humans are phenomenally resilient, and we do best by adapting to our surroundings. We know that there are 2 huge influences that determine sex differences, testosterone and estrogen, and the general, both for which both males and females have both, but just in greater proportions depending on what you are. And testosterone has promotes a strong interest in moving objects as well as more of a future orientation outlook. And we know that estrogen promotes a strong interest in familial people, personal relationships, and has more of a reflective rumination orientation. We know that when we're talking about younger children, but maybe it doesn't stop there, boys tend to show more physical aggression, which connects a lot to testosterone, and girls show a lot more relational aggression, which connects a lot more to estrogen. We know that males are physically more capable of falling in love faster than females. Adult males, they don't have the gateway of, I don't know, is this going to work out, that women have inherently built in them. We also know that males will experience more jealousy over sexual infidelities, whereas women will experience more jealousy over emotional infidelities. Females will experience stronger cravings, again thinking of estrogen, past reflection orientation, food cravings, also almost any addictions, harder for females. We know females have higher rates of depression world over, but males have higher rates of suicide and homicide. And we know that males and females, when we just quantify it, how much do they talk in their required talk, which I'm defining as school or work, it's almost indistinguishable. But the big difference in communication, both the style of it and the reasoning for it, the desire of it, comes down into how we choose to talk in our free time and in our social relationships. That's where you see marked differences. And as coined by others, women's style of talking is called rapport talk, and men's style of talking is report talk. One's more focusing on connecting, one more on competing. That was week 1, if you remember, okay? And now week 2, which I've just got one slide on, looking more at kind of the state of boys and girls as they're growing up. We know that girls, particularly if we look at the last 25 years, have shown dramatic improvements in their academic performance. They've always been higher in reading and writing, but they've really come up in the maths and sciences. And we know that as of just a few years ago, in the world over, women make up more women are employed than men. So they're the majority of the workforce in almost every field, but they're still skewed, definite gender difference skewed in certain fields. We know that millennial women are adulting better than millennial males as a generalization. Boys are steadily dropping in their academic performance, and this is often coupled with discipline problems. We're seeing an increased rise. And then as compared to previous generations, if we just look at percentage of boys are not going to college, working, and faring worse than girls as we look at previous generations. So I left you maybe a little startled and alarmed last time, but this time we're going to make it a little fun, and we're going to do what one has to do when one is talking about gender, a battle of the sexes. 10 minutes, you come up with the most good ideas you can. How can we improve our communication with our males and females? And you can look at it at any age. And how can we improve our community? And I'm thinking more like our families, our schools, our church, kind of small scale community. Those are the two most common questions you all asked me about. 10 minutes, go work on your list of ideas. Share with your sexes. Ladies on this side, guys on the other. We're ready. Okay, one male, one female, come on up here. Rob's up first. We'll let him go. So just kind of hold the mic close to you.
Okay.
We'll put it in your pocket or something.
Okay.
And this is just for the recording version.
Okay.
So let's just hear what you came up with. I'm going to get my pencil.
Okay, great. So, we think for a group of guys, we came up with pretty good list here. So, I'll start with communication. A lot of stuff we've talked about in this group, I think, over the past years. But just listen more, active listening. And so, I guess these are just general tips about how to improve communication in general, but also with our kids. So listen more, actively listen, less electronic communication for sure. So we've talked about that ad nauseum, but just not texting so much as opposed to like talking with people face to face. When you're communicating, take interest in other topics, take interest in the other person, what they're actually trying to say, and respond to what you're hearing. Asking questions to advance a conversation, not just blindly being in a conversation and thinking of your next point, but actually asking about the other person. And especially with our children, encouraging communication opportunities in front of people. So we have some examples of, my daughter acolyted today, or people have read from the Bible. So encouraging things like that, which also engenders feedback, which I guess men in particular need. So those are our communication thoughts for community. More co-ed activities, so maybe having boys and girls play with each other more often in sports or community. Less electronic activities, again, more opportunities for face-to-face types of activities. Consciously decide to participate in communities. Don't just go home and watch TV, but try to do things as a family. Just actively get out there as a group. Church, coming to church, it's pointed out that that's a big part of what we're doing right now is coming to church, participating in things like this. So keep doing that, obviously. Service opportunities, very important, especially service opportunities with your children, especially service opportunities that engender a human connection. So instead of just going to make a bunch of baskets by yourself, really get out there and try to do something that involves face-to-face communication, and more neighborhood activities for the boys, in particular, and more social service opportunities for the boys. So that was our list.
Great. Okay. Well, we had some of the same and some very different. The first thing that we had under the communication was to make sure that we are understanding our own biases and our motivations and intentions, so that we can not assume the response from the other side. That also falls into the putting yourself in their shoes. And we talked about the idea of, like, in the 5 love languages discussion, where you talk about what you assume you're communicating or what you're trying to communicating is not necessarily the way they're receiving it, and just to make sure that you are thinking about it from their perspective before you respond. Slow down in the communication. Give the other person time to process things and not assume that they're ready to talk. Also, be selective about the time for communication, so to make sure that you're not trying to talk to them when they're in the middle of something else and not really available to pay attention to you. And then listen and make sure you are being present during the discussion. On the improve your community, this was interesting, because the first thing that we came up with was to ensure that there are opportunities for same-sex interactions, as opposed to the co-ed. Thinking that when men and women have opportunities to meet individually, that the women can talk and get all their talking out, and then they're better able to come back and be interact with the men in the way that they are interested in interacting. Bridging generation gaps, we thought that there was a good opportunity to learn, kind of also along with positive role models, so that you have people to learn from in communication skills. Opportunities to just practice good communication. So making sure that the kids have time to interact in person, which comes along with trying to limit the technology and screen use so that there's more face-to-face interactions. And then ensure a strong family. We thought that that was important. Just things like family dinners together and family vacations where it's just the family and not other friends coming along too, so that the family's strong and you see the good interaction among the family.
So I'm no fool. I'm not going to pick a winner. It's a tie. Unbelievable how y'all pulled that off, right? But what I wanted to do is just get us talking about it, right? It seemed a little bit ironic if I was going to suggest that we need to improve our communication and that I lecture the whole time. That doesn't seem inherently like a good plan. So what I do want to do, though, is give you, and I limited it to 4 for each answer to this question that I gave myself. That was completely arbitrary, probably also being mindful of time. I could probably come up with 30 relevant ideas. But these are all based on research, relevant recent research, and stuff that is things that I think is very implementable. So when I was talking with Blake, my husband, who is not here right now because there are, I don't know, I'm going to say 29 little boys running around our house right now. Blake is the den leader for Boy Scouts in our group, and so we had a camping skills party on our property. We live on 5 acres, so we've got some land. And so they all came and with either a sibling or not, lots of them just dropped off, no parents. So anyway, Blake is manning this massive, it was camping skills. So all these little 3rd grade boys built their own fires, put up their own tents, cooked their own dinner. I mean, they had to learn the camping skills. It was pretty charming. And it rained last night. Right, the only night it rained. But anyway, now they're learning how to air out their tents and before putting it away and it gets all moldy. But anyway, when I was speaking to Blake about how what I've talked about and what aside from the topics that you all were giving me, he said I think what people most want is to have some takeaways, have some things that are nuggets that they can just put in their back pocket and make their life a little bit better, make their experiences with the opposite sex a little bit better, be it with their mothers or their children or their spouse. And so that's my hope of this list, is that it can just small things that are doable. And so that's what generated this list. So when we look at communication, the 4 tips that I have, the first is teaching empathy. And empathy is so unbelievably thoroughly researched because it is so utterly important for everybody. But what's shocking is how better we do this with our girls than our boys. When they look at little tactics that actually improve empathy, a big one is storytelling. Also reading books. Because in order to develop empathy, you have to have a sense of where someone else is coming from, and also just flat out teaching, like this is what empathy is, this is behavior. And there's a recent study, 2017, that involved 964 kids and their parents. They looked at the US, Canada, and Great Britain. So I always appreciate a study that does something a little beyond just one little college experience, which is what we professors are apt to do, study who's around us, it's easier. So this is an international study, and they're looking at how much time they spent talking about empathy, just direct teaching, storytelling, and reading. Those are the 3 areas of activities they looked at. And it said in all 3 countries, girls received more time from parents. And when asked why, they said it was just easier. The girls would listen more interested more, which is no reason to not keep giving it to the boys. So teaching empathy predicts so much happiness. Another recent study looked at those who were what they call assertive bystander behavior. So this is someone who sees something that's not going well, maybe it's bullying, maybe it's someone, and people who have higher rates of empathy are more likely to get involved, to say, hey, stop, you need to get involved. And so teaching empathy not only serves the person better, but it certainly serves their community better. And on the simple efforts of just how much time do you read, how much time do you share stories, and how much time do you teach the concept of empathy, both the kids and the parents reported boys got less time than girls. We need to fix that. Encouraging fantasy play. Again, one of the most well-documented, healthy things to do, and we tend to associate it with little kids, right? This is just pretend. This is put on costumes and become a dragon. This is play house, play doctor, play ninja. This is getting out Legos and creating communities. So when we think of fantasy play, we often think of it with little kids, but it shouldn't stop there. The concept that we're really developing under encouraging fantasy play, it's called theory of mind. So in psychological literature, it's a big deal. And the earliest it can happen, just from a developmental perspective, is about 18 months. And there's all sorts of fascinating tests how they figured this out. But overwhelmingly, girls naturally develop theory of mind first. So girls are roughly 18 months, boys are about 6 months behind. And what theory of mind is I have, for the first time, recognized that you have a different thought than me. Like if I am upset, you might not be upset. The big test they do on little kids, this is done by, I'll think of her name in just a second, but she's out of Berkeley, and she's really one of the most recognized child developmental psychologists, and she puts goldfish crackers and raw broccoli out. And this on an 18-month level, they get it. Like there's something good and bad happening here. And what they find is that if she says, I like broccoli, before you have theory of mind, and then she says, can I have something? Before you have theory of mind, every little kid just gives them the goldfish because they're like, that's impossible. How can you like broccoli? I don't like broccoli. You can't like broccoli. It's not possible. But when you've experienced theory of mind, which is a developmental phase, I can say, I don't like goldfish. And the little kids will go, well, all right. And then they'll give you broccoli because they're able to finally recognize you have a different feeling than me. And being aware that this is a critical developmental stage that all humans go through. Naturally, boys go through it later than girls, but we can encourage more development of the awareness that others have interests different from ours if we simply try out different roles. You see this all the time in therapy, be it marital counseling, be it anxiety therapy. In adult language, we often call this imagined interactions. It's the same concept. We learn how to express ourselves. We expand our vocabulary. We literally develop empathy because we have to think, how would my spouse feel if this were said? So just switching roles, playing out is a really easy, quick way to practice developing our communication skills, knowing that it's got lots of applications. And really, it's really how you can take empathy on a test drive. You can really go, I don't know, if I were to pretend to be in this situation. And one thing I want to emphasize, and I'll repeat this several times throughout, there is one, no point to doing it because it really is fruitless, and two, I don't think any benefit. It's not like we're trying to have boys only play with dolls and pretend that they're nurses or pretend that they're in a medical or a nurturing or a house experiment. And we're not trying to have girls only play with trucks and be rough and tumble. We're not trying to discourage natural proclivities, but what we are trying to do is maybe introduce additional ones so it's not just so segmented. So there's been tons of research. If you give a bunch of boys little dolls, they start whacking each other, and the dolls turn into swords, right? You can give a bunch of girls trucks, and they start making a truck family, and then one truck puts the other truck to bed, and parents are like astounded, like, I didn't teach this. I'm not raising them. And to some degree, they're correct. It's just that this is a natural interest, and testosterone and estrogen will show this again and again and again. But it's not to say you don't then never give a little boy a doll and you never give a little girl a truck, or you might not just, when you have the opportunity to encourage thinking in a world that you haven't, even just things as adults, like what would it be like right now if I were, a rocket scientist? What project? I mean, just the act of thinking of something for which you are not can really help us develop compassion and awareness and vocabulary and feelings, and I think ultimately our communication. Relatedly is expanding our emotional vocabulary, and Daniel Goleman's best-selling book, he's a big psychologist at Harvard, called Emotional Intelligence, really developing that. There's just tons of evidence, they call it your EQ instead of your IQ, that it predicts your happiness in life. In fact, over 50% of people's success when they look at relationships, health, life quality, effectiveness, and advocacy, meaning they get to be in charge of what they do. More than half is due to their perceived emotional intelligence, as well as how others rate them. A recent study in Forbes came out that 90% of people who are performing in every career imaginable, 90% score really high in emotional intelligence. So it doesn't matter what career you're interested in, if you have the ability to understand your feelings, others' feelings, have probably done a lot of fantasy play in your life, demonstrated empathy, and quantitatively the average, and this has got a huge spectrum, but the average is people who are rating in the top 10% of emotional intelligence earn $30,000 more per year than those who are lower. So it literally pays to be emotionally intelligent. With little kids, with developing an emotional vocabulary, I mean, there's wonderful resources out there. There's all those wonderful picture charts. My child had never heard the word smug before, and this was so fun for him this summer. I was like, give me a smug face. And he said, So it's fun to play out smug. So literally just having an identification chart that we can do it as adults. They have magnets. You can put it on. How are you feeling today? Just to learn the words. The phrase that we use a lot in the research is you have to name it to tame it. Little boys, as we talked about, have more trouble with discipline, more trouble with attention, and a lot of it results in a lot of anger and frustration, because it's very frustrating to feel like you're always in trouble and no one's paying attention to you. So one way that you can really alleviate, particularly little boys, is being able to, all negative emotions are not one word. I mean, there's really nuanced differences between, are you feeling jealous right now, frustrated, just straight up mad, etc. So naming it, just being able to literally know the word for your emotion, and this is really effective for adults too. If you can literally say, I am feeling, and then you say the word and you know it's right. You're like, yeah, I am feeling just hopeless. That's my word. You will notice blood pressure immediately calms down. Just identifying it properly. Arguably the greatest state of happiness any of us will ever have is feeling known by another, truly known. And the only way we can be truly known is if we're able to know ourselves. And so if you can identify in almost any moment what is the adjective that you are feeling at that moment, that's a hard skill to do, and one that really can create internal happiness and make you much easier to communicate with. So being emotionally intelligent and identifying our emotional can really help with communication skills, when I can tell you how I'm feeling and why I'm feeling it. This last one seems odd, I would think, that I put it on a list, particularly when I'm talking about gender. Everyone knows, I don't think it's terribly controversial, that practicing mindfulness reduces stress, reduces depression, alleviates anxiety. But what's curious is in the mindfulness research, it's very gendered, the chosen practices. For example, mindfulness can be reached through lots of reasons. Yoga, meditation, highly feminized. It is rare to go into a yoga studio and see many males, if not, dominant males. Males here, do y'all go to yoga? Any of you? Okay. Meditation practices, right? Then they also look at, you don't have to get meditation in a studio with an instructor, just spending time outside, camping, as we did last night, but by yourself, right? So there's a real point of mindfulness is to have certainly be able to be shut off from others and just have some centering time. And they look at how many females choose to go on hikes, even just a short walk around the neighborhood, certainly overnight. And again, you just don't see many females engaging. So I'm not suggesting we give up what's working for us. I mean, if you have meditation, prayerful practices, just recentering time, keep what's working for you. But isn't it interesting that we know it all is very effective? So it may be, girls, try camping by yourself one night. That might bring more anxiety than mindfulness, but maybe just start with a neighborhood walk by yourself, a nature-infused mindfulness. And maybe fellas who haven't tried before, try a yoga or a meditation class. Certainly music plays a large part in mindfulness. But it's interesting why we have so many wonderful tools and yet we're not using what maybe the other gender is using, just trying out different things. So if I were to walk away with 4 communication tips to help our genders be more understanding and aware and improve our little boy situation, these would be my 4. And let me get to my community list. If I had to offer just kind of a one-stop shop for further research on this topic, it's going to be Yale University's Center for Emotional Intelligence. Go to their website, Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, and you will see more book recommendations, video clips, article publications, research.
For adults and children?
For, yes, adults and children. And they're not specifically looking at gender. So that's one caveat here. But one thing that they do that I did want to bring up that you can do as a family, but they have an entire school program. And it's called RULER, R-U-L-E-R. It stands for Recognize Emotions, Understand Causes, Label Emotions, Express Emotions, and Regulate. A lot of what we already talked about. And they have their ruler system that they can come and teach churches. They can come and teach, any community entity that you want, and really emphasize the importance of emotional intelligence, since we know as an adult it has such high predictability of your own happiness, your career happiness, etc. But what can we as an institution in our communities do? And the ruler workshop system. It's books, it's videos, it's lesson plans, it's learning, materials, but also they have just tons of other stuff. So I just think utilizing the resources that are free and are out there, and this is not the only one, but it's one of the most recognized, and it's extremely comprehensive. So go to that website, spend 5 minutes on it, Google around, check out the Ruler program, see if it's of interest to you, and if so, you can expand it to whatever level of school or community you want. This one really struck me as interesting. This is let me get the exact right, in 2018, Pew Research Center did a study in which they looked at American adults and they surveyed them, and they had all sorts of questions, and they wanted to know, do you think it is more due to being effective in this area is due more to biology or cultural, right? So it's the nature, nurture. And what I can tell you is that it's a silly question. And Pew knows this. Pew is a very bright little research center, but they weren't looking for accuracy. They were looking for perceptions. And what they found is very gendered answers. So they asked all sorts of things. Let me think about where we want to say it. They looked at expressions of feelings, interest of subject area in school, sportiness, etc. And on every single category except one, males overwhelmingly said the differences are due to biology. Women overwhelmingly said the differences are due to society and culture. And even more apt perhaps to this group, this is a specific, they were like 60 data points, but here's one. 58% of male chalked up the differences in parenting to biology. 61% of females said the causes of their parenting difference is the expectations from society. So we've got 58 versus 61% guys saying, I parent differently because I'm a guy, and that's just biology. It's just what it does. 61% of ladies are saying, I parent differently because I was told to do it this way, and I'm adaptable, and I'm just going with culture. The only one guys and girls agreed on was physical differences. Thank goodness, both guys and girls said, you know what, I think the fact that we have more males growing facial hair than females, that's probably biology. I don't think culture had anything to do with that. But for the physical differences, there seems to be inaccurate perceptions on both. It is absolutely never can be one or the other. So shame on Pew for asking a ridiculous question that both were going to fail out, but shame on the rest of us for still holding on to perceptions that are 100% wrong. It is as much you can't separate them. It's just absolutely a silly question. Biology and society are intertwined, so let's not fall back on kind of lazy, maybe ideas like, I don't know, I'm just a guy, or I just have biology, or girls, well, I don't know, culture just said I can't do anything. Nah, none of that's true. None of it's true. Except maybe the physical differences. Okay, fine. I can't change my eye color by thinking about it, right? My point about leadership. So this has gotten a lot of attention, particularly as there are more female leaders out there and differences. And this is a hot off the press, August 2019 Harvard Business Review study. I just read it this week. Most of the other stuff I had put in my class, but this I just read this week. And what they find is that, you bet, of course, there are differences in leadership. Male and female might indicate one. And they categorize it as there are more males that demonstrate what they call monologue leadership style, which is a little more autonomous, a little more literally lengthier monologues. And women have more dialogue leadership style, which is a little more inclusive, a little more talking. And guess what? Both are very effective. It's really up to what works best for you. So it's not a this is better, must be more like that. However, in all of the areas in this August 2019 publication, they said in all the areas they had 900-something individuals rate. It was both rating their own leadership as well as the perception of the leadership skills and others. So it was self-report data as well as evaluative data. And what they found is on all but one leadership skill. They had very similar findings that women in leadership positions were judged as competent as male counterparts. Small differences in areas. One major difference, confidence. Overwhelmingly, the males felt they were more confident, and people perceived the males as more confident. Women felt they were less confident, and women perceived other women as being less confident. But this even gets more nuanced when we look at ages. And they found that when comparing the confidence rating of leadership for men and women, the largest difference was for the under 25. Younger female leaders don't strike others as being confident, and they don't feel very confident. And it says maybe that's also that younger males are over-reporting their confidence. A little hard to say, but we just know there's a big gender difference there. At age 40, for the first time, the confidence rating of leadership merges. And curiously, by 60, age 60, females actually have a slight edge. As it says, most people's confidence gains with age. Good, as it should. With wisdom, maybe you're a little more confident as a leader, but interestingly, the post-60 group, females increase a little bit over males and around 40. So it's an interesting, I think, reflection of our society that it's not trying to make guys lead like girls or girls lead like guys, but recognize that we have different styles that are both very effective, except the confidence piece is maybe one we could work on with our younger female leaders, that they don't need to try to not be who their natural style is going to be. The last point I want to make is just sort of some quantitative data. When I think about differences between males and females, we need to recognize as a community the numbers we're dealing with. Maybe when you were having your first child, you thought you had a 50-50 chance of having a boy and girl. That's never been true in the history of the world, right? There are always more males baby born around the world than girls. In America, the numbers are about for every 105 babies, you get about 100 girls. If you look at China, it's about 115. So this is talking about infant mortality rates and preferences. Baby boys are born with more frequency, and baby boys die faster, such that by middle age, it evens up. So baby boys are they're more likely to be born premature. They have much more lung and infectious disease issues. Then we certainly go to the teenagehood, where young males, as we know, have higher rates of suicide and homicide. They're just more likely to engage themselves in reckless behavior, much more dangerous professions. So we have more baby boys born, but by mid-20s it evens out, and then it starts sharply changing, much more dramatically. In America, if we look at how many 70-year-olds we have, 89 males compared to every 100 females. And when we get to our age 100, I mean, it is rare to have a 100-year-old male. For every 25 males that reach 100, we have 100 women. So you have 4 times greater likelihood of reaching 100. And just think what that means. From a gendered society, more baby boys in the world, roughly the 20, 30-something-year-old the same, and then we have decidedly more elderly females, especially as we get older. And I just think it really changes the composition of our discussions and our ability to recognize what our needs are when we know that the numbers are not even and actually never have been. From a biological perspective, what they talk about, like, well, then where do guys and girls really kind of settle in? We know when they're newborns, they're pretty similar, and then we get these blasts of estrogen and testosterone, and then culture happens, and then woof, we're off to the races. Well, it's kind of nice that it does come a little bit closer to. Women go through a period of menopause, as we know, which from a biological perspective, it's the slowing down of reproducing estrogen, right? It's really slowing down of estrogen. Men equally go through a period called andropause, which is the counterpart. It's the slowing down of producing testosterone. And so they call the post-andropause male and the post-menopause female, and this is well past it when all the hormones have settled down, they call it the happy grandparent stage. But if you look at the brains of roughly 70-year-olds, you don't actually have to be a grandparent to experience this, but the 70-year-old male, the 70-ish-year-old female, after having gone through andropause, having gone through menopause, have the most in common they've had since infancy. And when we look at the marital data, it tends to be couples who've been married their whole life and they're reflecting back. Those tend to be the happiest years. There's less natural biological differences between them. There's not as much estrogen and testosterone causing any of the muck. Maybe you've settled into a pattern. Maybe you've raised children. Maybe they're gone. You've already done the career, empty nester, and you've just kind of settled into it. So there is hope of males and females just from a biological perspective feeling like they've got maybe a little more peace about themselves. So I'll end with a final quote because I've been talking about guys and girls and why I think there's lots of community ways and communication ways in which we can make immediate improvements just to our experience of gender with our kids, with our peers, with our parents, etc. But you may feel like this. Men who don't understand women fall into two groups, bachelors and husbands. So I think there's still some room to be made of like this is still a confusing thing. And I guess my challenge to both of you is well, just don't give up. Don't give up being confused. Try out the communication and community buildings. And ladies, let's lean in. Dr. Gottman says that the three things males need to further communication with any female: affection, humor, as in you think I'm funny, and respect. So if you make me feel respected, you show me affection, or you give me humor, I will continue working with you. That is a common response that males need, and the overwhelming thing females need is not respect, affection, and humor so much as the number one need is to feel heard, just to feel like you've listened, that I've got your full attention. So keep on listening, keep on showing affection, respect, and humor, and this concludes my gender series. I hope you got a little nugget of something to help your own relationships out. Thanks for coming.